It's a great question too.
Now we are live.
It's not good, Colin, but the good news is the market won't move on that heavily, but it is not good news for us in the long run.
All right, happy Monday, everybody, and welcome to our October 2023 jobs report and inflation update. We hope you are well wherever you may be as we head here into the holiday season. And as we've done always for the last 11 months or so, and before that, we are doing our monthly report, giving you the economic news, how it affects your jobs and your career search, and everything in between. And as usual, ready to join us again is Dr. Riley White, professor of economics or finance, professor of finance at the University of New Mexico, and the associate dean at the Anderson School of Business. You can read about his credentials in our description for the event, as they're pretty long to read here and very, very amazing in their own ways. And so, as you watch this webinar today, we encourage you to ask questions, be inquisitive, be curious. The economy is in a really interesting situation and place right now, and we hopefully have at least commentary, if not answers, to help you find that light so that you can understand what to do next. Without further ado, Dr. White.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Albert. And thank you so much, Albert's List attendees. It is such a joy to come and talk with you. I know we switched days. Is it Monday? Is it Wednesday? Thank you for meeting me on Monday evening. I know your week is just beginning. I know it's stressful. I appreciate you spending the time to tune in to us as we talk a little bit about the jobs report today. So I'm going to fire up my slides. What we have here is I have this each month I come back with a new AI generated image that I asked for Albert's List. This particular one, I love how uncanny it is. Uncanny in the sense that it looks kind of fun and right from a distance, but up close it looks just terrible. Like none of the text makes sense and things are a little bit on fire. But I like the idea of it conceptually. Like I don't even know what this is doing. It's sort of hovering. It's not even withstand. It's an amazing piece of art. So I'm so grateful. What image generated 7283, Albert? This is the question. If you find all of the secret numbers in Albert's List jobs reports, you can compile them, and Albert will send you a code, and it will spell out a secret message for Albert's List viewers. So anyway, I use the image generator. This actually came from the ChatGPT image generation because, of course, I decided to sign up for it because I do find it very amusing. My son is 9, and as a consequence, he's a big fan of these stories, so we can generate images of characters that he reads about in the books that he reads about, which is very amusing for us. Anyway, and he makes his own. So anyway, I love it. And I love that Aaron from Teaneck, New Jersey, land of Paul Volcker, something economics in the water there. Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit about this. Albert gave you an essence of who I am and what I do. I do a lot of consulting. I do a lot of also external stuff, engagement stuff. I do a circuit of tours. We talk about the outlook for the next year, all the kind of shenanigans that happen. So I'm thrilled, and I want you, as always, if you've got questions, put them in here. Now, we did solicit questions beforehand, and Albert collected them. I've done my best to answer a few of them within the presentation. I've got a list of them here of the ones that I have seen. And in these here, let me grab this quickly. In my list of questions that I have, I've got about 10 or so that I'll get to within the presentation too. So if I don't get to your question or you don't answer it well enough, hold me to the fire. Just put it right in the chat window, and you can send the chat can also be direct to everyone, direct to me, whatever you feel most comfortable with, and just enjoy your time here. We're going to talk about a bunch of things, where we are today, where we're going in the future, and some things to look at. Oh, man, look at this. This is very interesting. Some facts Aaron's dropping on Paul Volcker, the former Fed chair who did a lot of things. Wow, very interesting stuff. I got to read this, Aaron. This is great. So let's talk about the jobs report. So you heard a bunch of different things. And I know as soon as the jobs report was released, we had like news articles out there where I felt like the reporters were kind of blowing off the dust on some stuff that indicated that maybe they were looking a little bit more negative on this jobs report. It was mixed news. It seemed like things were not as good as they wanted it to be, and they were really excited about firing up this article. It is true. The jobs data is softening, like a stick of butter on a hot summer's day. It's out there, and the job is no longer in the jobs. The jobs report is the jobs market right now is getting weaker. And there's a few reasons for this, which we'll kind of break down. Interestingly, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the full breakdown is to the right. We added about 150,000 jobs in October, of which 99,000 were in the private sector. Not a real stellar number for a private sector number, 51,000 in government. While unemployment rose to about 3.9%. Now, unemployment, as you know, it's a thing, it's a measure that only examines the people that are unemployed and looking for work being a key, divided by the size of the labor market. And so if you're not looking for work and you don't have a job, you're not included in this number. We're going to talk a little bit about that number, those differences in those numbers later in the presentation too. So when we look at this, so far, not as quite as good an unemployment number we saw earlier this year, but we're still adding jobs. We're not seeing a loss in jobs right now. Of the jobs we've added about 58,000 in healthcare, 19,000 in social assistance, and at least encouragingly from an economic perspective, about 23,000 in construction in fall, in sort of an autumnal period, which is a transition period between sort of a summer building period to a winter building period that still indicates there's enough sources of construction going out there. Some of this tied, of course, to some federal projects and federal spending, which are coming through the works, some other projects in the private sector. Now, interestingly, in this, the most notable thing we saw between September and October was the manufacturing number right here at the bottom. We lost 35,000 manufacturing jobs last month. And there's a reason for that. And the reason, as stated in the Bureau of Labor Statistics report, which is relatively unusual to be that specific, but they also talk about the United Auto Workers strike. And the United Auto Workers strike, of course, affecting the three biggest automakers in the United States, is affecting as they campaign for better wages and working and their demands on working conditions. It does have a ripple effect for other manufacturing industries upstream and downstream. So things like auto parts, demand for everything that goes into a car, as well as on the output on the dealer side and everything in between. And so seeing that 35,000 manufacturing activity drop is not surprising, but it is a cost to the overall economic picture. And then August and September, this is kind of a more nefarious news. We always look to whether or not jobs reports are adjusted higher or lower, because we have this number, 150,000, huzzah, great. But then what happens is more data comes in, there's some adjustments that are being made, and they usually go back and correct prior numbers. August and September collectively were revised downward to a tune of 101,000. So though we had some stellar numbers in the last 2 months, or relatively good numbers in the last 2 months, they have been revised downward since then. Participation has also dropped from 62.9 to 62.7%. That is the percent of working age folks who are indeed out there looking for a job. Now, this is interesting. We saw increases in participation pretty steadily starting after the COVID pandemic, very slowly. We're not at pre-pandemic participation levels. We don't expect to be. The biggest reason is demographic. People leave the workforce during times of recession or economic crises, not to return. A lot of these people retire, and they are no longer part of this. And so demographically, as we get it to become an older society, a society with more retirees, we're going to see the participation rate go down. It peaked around the year 2000. Actually, in the year 2000, we had a surge, working women entering the workforce for the first time, baby boomers coming of age. And since the year 2000, every time we've had a recession, it's kind of gone down, and we've never really recovered the numbers in the good times. And so this is important to watch, because it also is a good gauge to figure out if people are out there looking for jobs the way we want to. Is the participation rate healthy or not? There's a few ways to look at this. One, I would actually not look at the aggregate participation rate. I would look at the amount of working age folks between 18 and 54, the so-called prime working age. And let me see if I can grab something really quick on that. I look at the percentage of people who are quote unquote of the prime working age that are actually working. So it's about 81%, about 80.6% of the population of prime working age who are working. Let's see if I can get a chart here. Maybe I can dig one out from the chart depths of Chart Mountain here. Let me see, working age. I've got every other chart in the free world except, oh, there we go. Now we're cooking with Crisco. We got this. So let me let me screenshot this and I'll paste it. This is from the Economic Policy Institute. So when you talk about Participation, Albert, one of the things I look at is particularly this: employment to population ratio of workers aged 25 to 54 from 89 to 23. And this is a really strong gauge to figure out if people are there. We did hit kind of a very the highest we've seen in 20 years a couple months ago, but this has also started coming down a little bit and inching downward. And that's more alarming in that sense, because it does indicate either a higher number of unemployed people or a higher number of people who might be out of the workforce or discouraged from working or in another position to do so. So this is interesting, and this is really hard. So it's to say that 17% of people of prime working age are not working due to caregiving, schooling, something else. Could be all of those things. The question is, it could be caregiving, it could be one parent households that work, it could be a bunch of other things. There are many reasons that people may not be working, but a lot of it comes down to that. Aaron says we need to get prime working up to 85%. That'll transform family work. I think that's a wonderful goal. It's hard to imagine. We need some really substantial policies to get us there, not least looking at the question: anyone who is a parent here knows how hard it is to raise children and find childcare, and also find adequate childcare to maintain that. So a lot of times one parent does stay home, and it is a burden that falls disproportional on women. And Albert says maybe it goes up to Aaron, maybe it goes up to industrialized nations as single people forego families to work instead, as family planning is expensive. Helen said, do we expect this to go down as AI matures? Colin, that's a great question. That borders on a Malthusian type question. So Thomas Malthus, of course, the famous economist of the prior century, who looked at industrialization and saw a lot of technological growth as potentially offsetting workers. AI is interesting. So AI is absolutely going to offset some workers. And the question is, over what time scale? And the question is, if it resembles other technological advances we've had, it'll be very gradual in a way that the job market can adapt to. If it is faster than that, that would be very interesting to see, and it would result in job losses. So the point is, at which point does AI mature and really develop the confidence or people have the confidence in it to start doing all the stuff that we want people to do? So anyway, that's a good graph there. So participation's down. Wage growth, also interesting to note, eased a bit. So it was 4.3% year on year last month, down to 4.1%. These aren't like inflation setting numbers. Wage growth of 4% is good, certainly, and it's certainly beating inflation, indicating that real wages are rising. But on the other side of the equation, we're not seeing, usually wage growth is an ultimate power. It pushes the pedal on long-term inflation expectations, because you pay people more, you can charge more money for them to buy their goods. And so that's really interesting. The employee from where is the government ready? No, government is never ready for that. And childcare, patient care to EITC, 5 to 15K per person. Yep. President de los Reyes, he's going to rock and roll it. Albert, make the ITC permanent, create programs for childcare. Boom, boom. Those would be very effective. I agree. Both of those accounts would actually work really well. So Ernst & Young came out with an interesting forecast. They're looking at 4% unemployment at year end, 4.5% at the end of 2024. So this is interesting. So they're continuing. So the forecast on the jobs market as it stands right now is a weakening jobs market, but not a catastrophic weakening. We're not entering a recession. It is going to get tighter, which means it'll be harder to get jobs across the board. And sort of the situation that we've been in the last few years of a very strong job market will degrade somewhat, but not to a catastrophic level. 4.5% unemployment is still good for the economy. And I would probably venture that if we did reach 4.5% unemployment, the Fed might step in and incentivize and start lowering rates in a very meaningful way for the first time in a non-recessionary scenario in 25 years. And I think that is possible, but it's very interesting. Labor replacement, we're talking about it. Yeah, Albert, everyone's got 5 kids for everybody. Ugh. I barely have 1 child. I barely sleep enough. This is great. So let's talk about wages for a second, and let's talk a little bit deeper into this question. So one way to look at things, we get stuck on the month-to-month basis, but sometimes we forget all of the stuff that's moving past us in the long-term train. So the nominal wage growth is average hourly earnings for all workers year over year, 3-month change annualized, and a 1-month change annualized. And you can see the year-over-year change in wage growth, that kind of smoother line, that's kind of the darkest color line here. It peaked a little bit in early 2022. Since that time period, we've been kind of coasting downward in a downward slope. We're not seeing excessive wage growth. We are seeing wage growth, which is good, but it's not at a level that is catastrophic and not at a level that is going to affect or push long-term inflation to higher levels. But it also indicates that maybe the job market might be starting to mature a bit, a little bit less frothy from what we've seen in the previous years. In that same respect, we also look at one of my favorite charts I call from Fred, the Federal Reserve Economic Data Center. I looked at unemployment level and I looked at total non-farm job openings. So unemployment level, of course, the physical number of unemployed people we had, that shot up to 23 million in the pandemic. Since then, it has gone downhill. And there's about a little bit more than 6 million unemployed folks out there right now. The total openings, the total non-farm job openings. Now, there's more openings than there are unemployed, but the skill sets don't always match, as we know, right? So if you're out there, you're an electrical engineer, and there's all this service sector stuff available for you, and say to be a wait staff member of a restaurant, you're probably not gonna vouch for that job as your first potential pick. And so because of these differences in what employers want and what unemployed folks have as skills, this has been a persistent gap, but it's been a very wide gap, indeed the widest gap we have on record in 2022, but this has narrowed. There's been fewer openings now, and now also at the same time we have unemployment, the physical number of unemployed people physically also coming up. Aaron makes an excellent point in here. Wages can't keep growing if productivity is growing. Interesting. It can't keep growing if productivity is growing. So this is interesting too. Productivity, of course, and productivity and population growth often generate are two sources of aggregate economic growth in the long run. And so if population can't grow, we would expect increases in productivity to fill that gap. But that's a really interesting thing. So wages versus productivity are interesting. And productivity is not growing. Okay, yeah, I agree. I was like, wait, I got the sweats, Aaron. I'm like, that's a bold statement, but he's absolutely right. Wages can't keep growing if productivity is not growing. And this is interesting. And this comes down to Colin's point about AI. What will change the name of the game is if AI can manifest itself as a productivity enhancer to workers in a way that they can maximize their earnings, or if AI is something separate. And that's ultimately the question. We hope that technologically speaking, that things like AI amplifies the ability of existing workers in ways that boost productivity and thus give case for higher wages. But to this point, in the last few years, productivity has kind of flatlined across a lot of the economy. And it's critical that we fix this and get that going again for the sake of sort of long-term economic growth, particularly since population growth has been disappointingly small, not disappointingly small. There's mixed feelings about that, I know, and those things I know. But from an economic perspective in aggregate, it is something to consider. So this is one question. So one of the first questions I got, this is a really interesting one that I received on the Alberts List questionnaire. Is January 2024 going to be a good month for hiring? Noting that January 2023 was that month we had 500,000 jobs in January. It was great. And so what I did was I downloaded a whole bunch of data and then I analyzed it. We looked at median monthly change in labor force size since 1939, and then median monthly change in labor force size since 1998. This is by month. And so crunching the data for what a typical month looks like, a median month, medians not averages, because averages can be distorted, and especially April was distorted because we had that massive loss in the pandemic of 2020, which ruins all possible figures of that number. So looking at straight medians, January is a pretty mediocre month when it comes to hiring in general. I have nothing to believe that January 2024 we're going to knock it out of the park like we did in January 2023. I think we could have a more normal hiring scenario where we looked at over the long run. January is not a bad month for hiring. It is kind of, and since 1998, if I look in aggregate, since 1998, last 25 years, January has been one of the let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, the sixth best month for hiring. So it's like, it's not really, it's right there in the middle. So it's not going to be like a stellar January. And unless we really knock it out of the park, unless there's some convincing reason to, and I don't think there is, the amount of things that have added up that could reduce hiring in January exceeds the stuff that could build it in January. So I'm expecting not to have 500,000 jobs, but come here first in our early February jobs report, and I'll tell you when I'm wrong if we knock it out of the park again. This is going to break some people's heart at Thanksgiving dinner. No, I know I wasn't going to. I'm waiting for January to look for work again. The odds here, it's a month. It's a month like any other month. So I ran another test too. Are these monthly differences something that are important? And so I ran this Kruskal-Wallis H test, and this creates a p-value that basically says it's such a high p-value, there's no statistical difference between really labor force dynamics month to month since 98. But then you think, well, Riley, isn't it really seasonal? You're not really looking at this the right way. And so let's crunch the seasonal data. Basically, when it comes down to hiring in the last 25 years, the best time is, and this is the hard part, this is aggregate, not what's good for tech sector, not what's good for banking, not what's good for marketing, whatever field that you're in. It's a very generalized perspective, and it's very nuanced depending on the industry that you're in. So a lot of times we're overwhelmed by the sheer number of service sector workers. So for instance, late spring and early summer, you get a lot of hiring for summer seasons, particularly in things like leisure and hospitality where you can find jobs, things like construction, a lot more summer activity, and also late fall and early winter at the start of the holiday season, you usually get some good numbers, which will be really interesting to see how our November and December numbers shake out. Where we look at troughs, where we look at these negatives, these downside seasonal data is right here, post-holiday season, late summer, and it depends highly on your industry. Oh, R&D private investment has peaked with high rates and dropping, which means productivity will drop. Yikes, that gives me the willies, but he's not wrong. Aaron, that's a good point. Very good point there. And a good link from AAAS. Very good link. We know the question on our docket that says, should I go back to school? And despite my mixed messaging, I feel like a mortgage originator arguing why you should get a mortgage and how awesome it is to have a mortgage. I am an academic, and I am also an academic administrator. And so as a consequence, the time to go to school is right now, I say. And then I take my cigar and I'm like, how about those student loans? No, this is a fantastic question. And the short answer is it depends. It always depends. And in the end, the big picture is reskilling or upskilling, or whatever term you want to use for it, is always a good thing to possess in competitive job markets. Having a diverse set of skills gives you a diverse set of opportunities. Name of the game in the future is always whatever method gets you that, either through formal education or not formal education. Whatever you can acquire the ability to do something in a way that you didn't have the ability to do it before is the name of the game in the future job market. So Albert asks quickly, is there a way you can break this out by the job categories BLS reports on? I probably could, Albert. That would take me a while to do, but I like the idea. Professional services information. Let me go. Let's find out. Maybe Albert, as a catch up, I can do a quick analysis on that stuff as we go into it. I'm sure I can. I just have to download the data and do it. Super easy. And it's just you program it in and boom, boom, boom. So when you go back to school, there's a few things you got to think about. What kind of degree are you getting? And it's variable. So first of all, is that our education benefits part of your current employer's situation, and that's important. So when polled, and this is from a CNBC survey, looking at things among employers, about 80% offered some type of tuition reimbursement. That can be a very compelling thing, and make sure you take advantage of that as part of the employers. And that they already had that in place by 2021, and much of the remainder are either having it, are planning to implement it, or considering that for the future. Other things, your company may have counseling for student loan refinancing, college counseling, student loan refinancing, consolidation, 529 contributions, a whole bunch of things that could benefit you in the long run regarding your decision of whether to go back or not. And also, of course, when you think about things like master's degrees or even bachelor's degrees, if you're looking at that or looking at a different sort of degree that you have, there is a huge difference in what we call the ROI. And ROI depends on the degree that you have as much as it depends on the university you go to. And so it's a trade-off, right? A lot of public universities can be cheaper, but the ROI might be less on the outset. Things like Ivy Leagues and really high-ranking universities often have a lot of programs that offer really competitive ROIs across a number of fields. And so you have to be really careful into this. And so there's a sense of this, and looking at the evaluation of individual subjects, the stuff that does well, lots of science does well, but it's also heavily geared in interesting ways. So I saw some some highly ranked dentistry programs do well, highly ranked medical programs do well. But at the same time, obviously, I ran a financial literacy seminar a couple of years ago for a large group of physicians at a local hospital. And they were, physicians. They were very high earning, but they had tremendous amounts of student loan debt. And there were people who were not happy. They were actually, I would say, uniquely, tremendously unhappy. But I got this vibe. I'm like, oh my goodness. But they were, so happy is not the right term. They were financially secure, but not wealthy, in the sense that they had spent this time taking out all these student loans and buying, they bought a nice house and they have a nice car, and they pay their student loan check, and they have no money left at the end of the day. Nothing for savings, nothing for planning for long-term future, retirement, or anything else. And so it's extraordinary because people feel pressured to take on huge amounts of debt and take those huge amounts of dollars that they might earn in the future and do well by them. So it's very interesting. It's been a fascinating thing to watch in every respect of this. This is great. Look at all these shameless plugs that are happening here. Aaron says U.S. Public's R&D investments. Good comments on this. For the first time, U.S. does not produce the largest share of publications. That's true. That's a huge problem too. It's actually very interesting. So Aaron, you might appreciate this research. I gave a presentation about a week and a half ago. I had 2 papers at this conference I was giving. I was at in Taipei. And I was in Taipei giving these two papers in Taiwan, and one of them was on looked at. We had some data from our national labs, which includes Lawrence Livermore, Sandia National Labs, and Los Alamos National Labs. So our NNSA national labs, our National Nuclear Safety Administration labs. And we found that we were looking at the M&O contractors, the M&O operating contractors in each of these categories. So these labs have institutions that help run them, help manage the operations of them. And periodically they're changed. And the perception is usually it's based off of poor performance or bad safety record or some combination of these things. And so we found that in this data set that there isn't really a net benefit to changing contractors. It's very inconclusive. But we did find something interesting, an interesting relationship, that when you look at a national lab in the government and you try to improve safety in a national lab, like you try to reduce the number of incidents, in this case called ORPS, if you're familiar with national lab terminology. So you reduce the number of safety incidents, you actually get this a similar reduction in your forward citations and your patent count. So the actual R&D stuff that comes out of the labs is reduced as you improve safety conditions, which is a phenomenally interesting phenomenon to look at, because you look at that. I'm not arguing that you should, create sort of a reckless scientist point of view where everyone's, dropping a nuclear weapon on their foot. But it does present a situation that suggests that in pursuit of other things, we have to give up some other things. And maybe there's an optimization problem that lies within there. So Albert's got a couple of shameless plugs. Oh, Albert, thank you so much for the shameless plugs. We are very affordable, and we are marketing heavily to California this year. So if you are out there, wherever you are, we do have MBAs, we do have EMBAs, we have all the kind of things. If you have any questions about it, you can always reach out to me. Aaron says, yeah, look at this. It's all about the grind. Find something you actually like, field your domain, spend 2 years drilling in the field, working at a suck job, but then, pivot. There's a procedure that you have to do within it. But be careful about your degree. There's no right time in any situation. Upskill all the time. To Aaron's point, grinding is something you have to do, but at the same time, make sure you're learning. Develop that expertise behindhand, and you'll be fine. And that's the interesting part about this. You don't need a formal degree all the time to do well, and make sure the formal degrees that you do get are to your advantage. They give you that promotion at work, or they connect you well to networks of people that can advantage your future outcomes. When we think about this, I had another question, which is really cool. Was COVID a black swan event? This is a really good one. I like this one because I also agree with the answer. So I'm going to tell you, I agree that the answer is yes, but a lot of people don't agree with this because of the definition it left. So looking at TALIP, black swan event has 3 properties. It's an outlier. Nothing in the past suggests its possibility. It carries an extreme impact. Yes, COVID certainly did. Finally, despite being an outlier, after-the-fact explanations make the event appear explainable and predictable. I feel like that's often the case for COVID. So you look at something like COVID, and the purpose of this, and I took this image is from a blog that argued that it wasn't a black swan event. I'm going to argue that it is still a black swan event. I think COVID is, Aaron says gray swan. That's fair. Fair. So in its absolute definition, if you accept the Taleb definition of this, we know that humanity has been full of pandemics perpetually, right? It is not a surprising thing to have a pandemic. But I also want to think about the question of what we recognize as history and what we recognize on an economic timescale. In the modern economy, the post-war economy, we have not had a hit that has looked like this, that has resembled this in any way, shape, or form that you cut it. And it's not something that's repeated enough that I would call it like this. So it is at least a very dark gray swan to me, if not a full black swan in this situation, because if we look at sort of the cycles of economic growth over time, I can't really compare, say, the plague of Justinian to a plague of Justinian to a plague in the 21st century as being the same, because the nature of our societies, I mean, you could argue and say, well, Riley, there's a lot, and I get it. We can look at the number of deaths and the number of other things and how we look at these things. To have an immediate economic shock and a response, and the way that governments responded to this suggested that it was a black swan event. If it happened again, which it might happen in our lifetimes, I doubt we would respond the same way. And I think that suggests in itself, or that ability to learn from it suggests that it was a unique and strongly negative thing. I would characterize a few large events that way, though. I think if black swans are so rare, it's difficult to characterize them. I would take a more generous definition of black swans and include sort of the life-changing and demonstrable events that we've seen that have caused mass amounts of distress. Everything. I could even argue that 2008 recession was a black swan event of its own type, to have that sort of risk-taking be so widely understood by the market. So I have a more broad definition, and I would say yes to this answer. Lots of changes. Colin says lots of chances for black swan events that people feel cheated out on. It's smoke gray. It's smoke gray. I like that you found a website for 50 Shades of Grey, Aaron, and I'm sure you looked that up perfectly innocently. And you went this, I never, what is plumbus black? That's a fascinating color. I have a vocabulary of like 4.5 colors. I'm still working on that. Albert, if younger generations ever get experience home ownership and instead buy other things that significantly impact the economy or become rebellious like Chinese college grads, is that a black swan? What an interesting question. So if you end up in a situation, or would it, that's really interesting. It depends, in short. Become rebellious. So if we view it as an individual trend, so there's the trend. I would argue that trends can be followed, and black swan events are like taking a knife and chopping it right through a trend line as you see it. And I see that being, I don't see that as a knife chopping sort of event, but I do see that as a potential source of destabilization in the future. Particularly with regards to certain things in the nature of how things work, which is really interesting. So we've got, yeah, Aaron. You guys are great. Thank you so much. Hope everyone's doing well out there, by the way. How are you guys doing? You doing well? Good. We're got some people who are still hanging in there. Thank you all for coming in here. I know you're always welcome to send me direct questions as well. If you feel ever left out in the conversation or would like to send me something directly, never hesitate to reach out and I'll answer you too. So have we beaten the recession? So I would say, yes, it was a black swan event in the fact that it was an outlier. And we didn't know, even if I were to argue with the question of a pandemic was in 2019, I would not have predicted a global economic response in the manner that we had that produced the outcome that we had, followed by the stimulus that we had. I think that was a completely phenomenally unique phenomenon that we were going to see. But that being said, next pandemic might happen. I suspect our response will be different. So have we beaten the recession? And this is an interesting question, because this is not really a question. This was not one of the primary ones that were asked, but I'm going to relate this to the question that asks, what economic indicators should we look for that gives us the signs that the job market may grow? And how long from those signs to actual job market opening up do we have? And so I was trying to think of different ways to tackle this question because it's very good. And so there's a lot of data out there for you to look at and a lot of different things that you can explain. So have we beaten the recession? So we look at unemployment claims. So one of the things are, okay, back up a second. We have what's called an inverted yield curve right now. That means that short-term rates are giving us higher interest rates than long-term rates. And what that means is that's a highly unusual environment because there's a couple of reasons. If you look at things like the way the bond market works and the way that debt markets work, some of it is that a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year bond rate is more or less a market prediction of where investors expect those future rates might end up. On the other side of the equation, there's this idea that, if you do cut rates or the Fed is forced to cut rates in the future, that means that, well, we would do so usually in a recessionary environment. So it predicts a recession, and it's done so in most of the recessions and all the recessions in the last 50 years. And we have to actually go back to the early 60s and then 1957 to find a recession that wasn't predicted by an inverted yield curve. But it's not an immediate phenomenon. So when the yield curve inverts, as it's been inverted now for over a year, this is not something that is necessarily this is a yield curve inversion involving the 3-year and 10-year bond. It's not necessarily an immediate predictor of a recession. In fact, if we look at unemployment claims over time, and I'll blow this up for the people in the cheap seats out there, it depends substantially on a lot of different factors. But right now, our number of unemployment claims, while somewhat higher than where they were a year ago, are not anywhere near recession levels. But notice that no matter what recession we look at in the last 50 years or so, they do typically pick up in the next year. So I would expect unemployment claims, if this pattern were to hold, and it's no guarantee that it will, but it might be inverted for another year and then start rising. It might fix itself. The point is that there's a lot of economic data out there that indicates that, well, it is getting harder for the workforce. Uniquely, and this might be a source of disagreement even among economists, but I look to certain things. I look to how healthy consumers are doing. And I look to the level of our consumer delinquencies rising or falling. And right now they're rising, meaning that they're not at catastrophic levels, but people are showing some signs of stress. That indicates, since consumer spending is such a big percent of our GDP, that people are somehow being less are making worse financial decisions and are in a position of more economic stress than where they were previously in general. And as long as that happens, you see a deteriorating economy. And then when the recession happens, what happens is people, might lose their money, they lose their house, but then stuff typically improves. And so when we make that turn, that's when I'd be really optimistic that we're in a growing economy. And usually the difference between a 3-month and 10-year yield inversion, right now, though it's been very long, it's not the longest it's been. We've seen huge inversions before a recession happen in the 80s as well. I suspect this one is unique for a bunch of reasons, and maybe we'll avoid a recession altogether. But I think that there's still a lot that hasn't hit and is incorporated in the market, and I think you have to be very careful looking at data in the next few months in particular. Oh my goodness, I got to catch this up here. So Albert says, sort of like inverted yield curves, rising interest rates, increased credit card debt, higher vehicle delinquencies, all other items lead to, oh wait, what? Worse economic conditions. And the question is, will it be worse enough to be a negative GDP growth for us, or can we have a so-called soft landing that leaves us at flat GDP, or maybe just a little bit of growth? But the long story short is it's going to slow. And everyone's kind of in agreement that it's gonna slow and continue to slow. Albert says we've had so many job seekers express frustration in the last few months in our job seeker accountability group. Some have given up for 2023. So heartbreaking. They're hoping 2024 will be better. I've heard from recruiters that spring 2024 will be better, but it's hard to say. Even recruiters who might be well connected into the corporations themselves won't know for sure. And that relates to another question involving the tech industry. When is the tech industry going to bounce back? When are they going to recover? Aaron's right about this. CNBC, Bloomberg, IBD have been screaming recession for over 15 months, but consumer spending indeed. But here's the thing. I know, I got to tell you, and I got to tell you, and Aaron, to the point about this, though, it is absolutely wrong. And I was one of the ones, and I was calling a greater than 50% chance of recession a year ago that thought we would probably be in a recession. And I was wrong, which is wonderful. I love to be wrong about negative things all the time. So I'll tell you, we're not always right about a lot of things. And the consensus, I was wrong with a lot of people, not that that makes that better. But to the point is on this, we also are wrong in timing. And I think that right now, you're still seeing a deterioration in the markets. We're not at point zero where suddenly things are getting better and people are feeling better about it, because I'm just not seeing that in the data. And so the hard part is that when we get to a position when we're feeling better, I will toot the horn in saying we're over the economic hurdle and we're growing again, but we're not there right now. And that's the point. Whether we hit a recession or not is the question. And I don't know if we'll get there. And that's a really good point. And I know we might disagree on it, but I love it's disagreement makes the world go round, especially people who can talk about it in real time. So Albert says, I think recessions may be regional too. The UK's in a recession right now, I believe. Yeah, they've had flatline economic growth, which is really interesting. You can tie that up to Brexit, government policies, as well as a lot of things. Meanwhile, people are still buying houses in the Bay Area. Nice areas around the US are even seeing above asking prices. That's also true. Albert points out the consumer spending party is stopping soon with the return of student loan repayments, record high credit card debt, and otherwise. We're about to see a lot of bankruptcies, and we are tracking ahead of bankruptcies this year. That's the other thing. This year, we have more corporate bankruptcies than we've seen in the last decade. And so we're looking at other things that suggest that there is this decline, generally speaking, and we're feeling the effects of higher investment costs and a tighter, even though the job market's very good, it is tightening. And I think it's going to be a really interesting thing. Yes, and our favorite, of course, not to say that WeWork bankruptcy. Oh, WeWork. That's good. But we knew that one was coming for a while. Oh my goodness. The WeWork bankruptcy. Oh, WeWork it's been in a wonderfully downhill spiral for such a long time. Adam Neumann. What a ride it's been. No more cheap money sloshing around, Albert says, as Lou Manheim of Wall Street used to say. So anyway, so we've got that happening as well. And so the tech industry, there's a question about when is the tech industry itself going to recover? And that depends. And so you've seen a surge of interest in AI. AI surged, AI is now out there. AI is going to be a continuous process in this market. Looking ahead in the next 6 months, I read a whole bunch of different associations on how to address the tech industry as itself, a whole bunch of industry trade books, all these other things. There are more people who are negative about the next year than there are people who are positive. And I don't necessarily know that that means that it's true or not true. But I think one of the hard parts about the tech industry is because you're dealing with unlike other industries that are, for instance, if you're a steel worker, or if you're a banker, or even something else, you're an established industry that has a understood and predictable profit margin. When you start up a company or you have something else, you're making a conjecture as to what your future market will be. And right now, because of, as long as bad news continues to exist, and until we turn that corner on improving consumer credit quality, I suspect that tech will continue to be a periodic victim of these the combination of high financing rates and a challenging and more discriminating venture capital work situation, as well as a more looking at things from stock prices to everything else, apart from a few big firms who have done well, the general marketplace has been tough out there, and it's going to remain to be tough and competitive because there are a lot of ongoing situations at hand. So I see uncertainty and I see risk in the next 6 months to a year. Aaron says savings, private, public R&D investment, corporate cash, all told is 7 trillion. Agreed. But who maintains that savings and how those savings are utilized can indicate a good economy and a bad one. I mean, just because Japan has a ton of savings doesn't mean, of course, that it creates that it generates economic growth in itself. You have to take the savings and you have to utilize those savings in a way that makes sense. And fearful investors don't utilize them correctly. Albert says some of these tech companies do have a profitable model, though. Google ads, search, Facebook ad search. Just, it's just that when ad spending goes down, true, we're all connected in a fascinating way. So even when we look at corporate bankruptcies or the questions of corporations cutting back on some of their plans, that may result in some changes to their advertising revenue structures. Can't mind more ads if you can't steal ore. Albert and his folks' wisdom. So Japan's 30-year recession called. It wants its lack of growth back. Oh, Japan's been in such a rough ride for so long. I might go to Japan in March. I'm working on a tour. Labor turnover has gone down, though. I'm interested in this. 6% rates. I'm interested. Anyway, so one question we had, are we undercounting workers in the unemployment rate like we did back in 2008? And this was some discussion that we had. And this has been a fascinating discussion. So we certainly always undercount workers in some meaningful way. How is the unemployment rate figured out? And going back to this question, we've got a whole bunch of unemployment numbers, U1 through U6, that we actually are released from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. U3 is the measure that we quote as the unemployment rate. And this is the number of people who are jobless, but actively seeking employment. That rate is measured by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which contacts 60,000 randomly selected households across the country and records the employment status of each person 16 years or older. Contacted or not by the BLS, you may look to this and say, well, automatically, looking at this, 60,000 is actually a pretty robust sample size if you extend it statistically to the rest of the country. However, you can argue that many people are uncontacted by this number. And for instance, I will never pick up a phone call from something I don't know, nor will I answer I will quickly delete a survey. So if I have been asked by BLS about my employment status, I have not included that. So it is a very, very unlikely phenomenon for you to be contacted this way, but it does likely produce some noise and some people fall through the cracks. Now, U5 is a bit more of a thorough measure of unemployment. This uses the total employed plus what we call discouraged workers. I'm like, you're out there going, I'm discouraged, I'm discouraged while I'm working. Plus all other persons marginally attached to the labor force as a percent of the total civilian labor force, plus all persons marginally attached to the labor force. And so U5 is a bit bigger measure with the discouraged workers, but U6, that's the broadest measure that we have. That's the percentage of the US labor force that is either unemployed, underemployed, meaning that you're working at a job that you don't have enough hours at, and it's not rising to your level of skill, marginally attached to the workforce, or have given up looking for work, and that's the highest number. And so right here, U6, if we're looking at the turn on all of this, notice that all U3, U5, and U6 show kind of a U shape. We're looking on that upward measure now. We're looking at a situation where unemployment rate looks like it's on the cusp of starting to rise meaningfully again. And so at this level, you're looking at this saying, is this incorporating every person out there? Absolutely not. And there are certain people that fall out of the cracks, that are out of contact and not included in the system. But statistically speaking, though, is it a good measure of the trends of the economic environment? Yes, and it continues to be so. U6 is particularly interesting too. Even though we're at historically low levels right now, they are trending upward, and that is something we will have to watch going forward. And even right now, looking at the number of people in this category, U6, whereas the official unemployment rate remains comfortably below where we were in the year 2000, U6 is right there where we were back then, and that's fascinating. So Albert says, I think our January or February JOLTS report is going to show that no one's quitting and openings are high, and the lack of movement will be an interesting observation. That's possibly true. Look at this. Like the BLS, Nielsen has also not contacted me to analyze my television viewing habits. Has anyone had that experience? When I was younger, I was like 9. I remember our household, when I grew up, it was contacted by Nielsen to be a ratings measure. And so like any other 9-year-old, I turned it to the Weather Channel, and I called it a day. And I guarantee you, for months afterwards, the Weather Channel was the highest ranking weather related channel for that demographic group, because the sample size that they used was so small. I really improved their advertising revenue. It was full of kids ads after that. There was really, really distorted their data. They didn't believe it. What kind of 9-year-old does that? A future finance and economist. That's who does it. Aaron says, yeah, this is good. Good discussion between Aaron and Albert in there too. So that's kind of the big picture on those issues. So are real wages rising? And we hear this a lot, and this is a Joe Politano chart, but I think it's very informative and it's very interesting. So in short, a lot of this, and if you want to sign up for a nice little sort of a mailing, so to speak, I'll link it to you. Aprecitas Economics is a Substack that produces some really nice technical charts. And about once a week or once a month, I forget the frequency, they give you a free email with a lot of interesting data in it that Joe Politano writes. And I'm very fascinated by the logic and discussion within it. So I'll put a note there to this Substack here. Let me put this in the window. That's right. I'm telling you, Aaron, Nielsen, I had the same type of thing. It was this massive box you connected through this archaic modem, bam, I had the same thing. So this is a cool thing to follow if you're interested. You don't have to pay money for it. It does have premium content, but it does send you, if you want to sign up your email, it's a really nice email to read that they produce. I love the data, and even if you don't agree with all the logic, I think it's really well presented. So that's a nice link for you guys. So the median wages are up but below trend. In other words, that if we look at how the wages have increased, although we haven't been keeping up to the trend, we still are indexing. We still have a positive trajectory on real wages. But again, why doesn't it feel like we have a positive trajectory on real wages? Because we are indeed tracking below trend. And not all industries are this way. Leisure and hospitality has tracked above trend. A lot of industries have been very flatlined in terms of their wages. And another thing to think about too, good GDP numbers. Let's think about this. So we've got the real GDP growth over time. We had the stunning third quarter last quarter, and it's really excellent. And this is kind of what I think Aaron was alluding to earlier, involving our aggregate real private investment growing, contributions to real GDP. So looking at consumption really hit the mark in the third quarter. That drove us upward. Government was still coming in strong there, and investment in particular has shown a remarkable increase after months of decline. That is good. When people invest money towards the future, they're investing towards things that build economic capacity. And that is a good sign for the overall economy. One of the reasons I'm not calling for a recession immediately is numbers like this one, that even though the consumer credit quality is declining, investments are going up again. And if I see this trend continue, that will bode well for the U.S. economy in the near term. And so this is kind of where we are. And so if investment can continue in a meaningful way, and I'm hopeful that it will, I want nothing more than us to avoid and have a soft landing where we bottom out this year somehow, but still remain positive. And then we build with all the investment happening in ways that can meaningfully lead to economic growth and improve quality. I would be down for that 100%. But then you got this, and this is a fun thing as well. So maybe you've seen a couple of these charts lately. Consumer confidence. How confident are you? Not, we're all overconfident in some things. In a recent study, they showed that 80% of people are better than average drivers. It's really interesting. 80% of people say that they're better than average drivers. They say that they're better than average drivers. So if that is your perception of the situation, we know that certainly people are wrong in aggregate, because 80% of people can't be better than the mean. But, I don't know. For me, I'm a worse than average driver, but I've never hit an Albert's List attendee before. Knock on wood. So, looking at consumer sentiment, this big number here, this has been a fascinating phenomenon over the last 4 years. This used to be a pretty good economic indicator regarding the strength of the economy. This is often a very, that's a good way to put this, a very politically divisive measure, because people can be influenced significantly by a lot of the media they consume, the politics they represent, for good or for bad, both sides, right? And so it's a situation that's very challenging. Overall consumer sentiment has been dropping. And even though we had a huge recession right there in 2020, consumer confidence is lower than it was at the depths of the recession we had in 2020, which is an extraordinary figure. And the consumer sentiment, this is the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment. This is based off of 1-year economic outlook, a 5-year economic outlook, buying conditions, expected personal finances, and current personal finances. And so although we have a lot of data to show that people are doing fairly well, the job market is strong, savings have come down, but we're still spending money. Consumer confidence hasn't been there yet. And we thought in the last few months, and the last year in particular, we had an upward trend. This has been remarkably reversed since mid-year, and people are becoming more negative on the economic sentiment. This is a charged topic. And when we ask people their expectations of inflation, we are looking at a situation that is divisive politically. In general, independents argue that the forward outlook on inflation is about 4%. Republicans argue it's more like 5%. Democrats argue it's more like 2.5%. And so the story of consumer confidence is often one that's highly dependent on the nature of how the question is asked, the nature of how people do it. And so this indicator has been trending negative, and it's interesting to watch this, but we're not seeing it fall through with necessarily what consumer spending is actually behaving like. And so there is kind of a discrepancy between these two things. And you know, it used to be, again, a very compelling measure of consumer confidence, but in this era in particular, and particularly with the divisiveness that we're experiencing right now, it's very hard to gauge whether or not we will recover in a meaningful way on consumer confidence, or whether we can predict this again. So in short, people are becoming less confident. That's important to know, particularly if we go around the question of, can we maintain high levels of retail spending through the holiday season? Now, inflation expectations. This has also been an interesting chart. So compiling data from Bloomberg, University of Michigan, the Federal Reserve Board, the Federal Reserve Board in New York, and Arch Global Economics. If we put all this in one beautiful chart, we get kind of our anticipated 5-year forward break-even inflation rate, all these future-looking inflation rates. Where's inflation going to be? And interestingly enough, although we've made great progress in the last year on reducing inflation, including to the point where the Cleveland Fed has argued that we'll hit the 2% rate without a recession, maybe late 2024, early 2025. The forward year, the midterm inflation expectations are trending higher to a level of about 3.25%. And what's interesting about that is that does have implications to the nature of how the Fed responds to investors, and the Fed makes decisions around policies involving the interest rates. If this pushes upward and we show greater indication or fear of higher inflation rates, then the Fed is more likely to keep rates higher for longer. If, on the other hand, investors start lowering their expectations, that does suggest more dire economic conditions ahead. The Fed might want to stay ahead of those, and they might want to lower those discount rates to boost economic outcomes. The discount rate is one rate. I mean, we're talking about overnight lending to large banks, but it's so important because it causes a lot of it helps set a benchmark that a lot of other rates follow. And it also increases the cost of doing investment in the country when we raise it. And so it increases our cost of investment. And so projects that seem like a good idea when rates are low often become a really bad idea, and they don't get done when rates are high. And so it has a really, really good, significant long-term effect on us. Now, this is an interesting chart from Bloomberg also in the last couple of weeks. And, you know, one of the things that we follow as we look towards the transition and the green energy transition and other things, gasoline consumption, although in aggregate very, very high, it's falling per capita fuel use right now is at a 20-year low, which is really interesting. And so apart from this blip, the 2020 COVID pandemic, where people stopped driving, flying, and engaging in any sort of external facing activity, we're seeing sort of this trend. So even though it's been a very gradual, sort of long-term, very uneven trend, we are seeing per capita use decline. And that is interesting, particularly as we regard commodity markets with regards to things like oil. So Albert says, speaking of which, inflation report comes out tomorrow. I think any predictions? Are we going to see a hawkish or dovish J-Powell? So inflation outlook is going to be interesting. So the good news is right now we saw a very interesting bump in the last month caused by higher gas prices. Gas prices have since declined, and I think that's going to be beneficial to our bottom line. So I think if I look towards our forecast, and I'm trying to figure out, I had a feeling this was coming, and I was debating whether or not I should actually provide a numerical forecast or not. Let me think here. I think we should probably be, I'm hoping for, I don't know. What do we want to hit? Anyone else want to? Let's start off. What's a good example here? An inflation rate. So, it's going to be it's going to be in the threes. 3.5, 3.3 would be really nice if the gas prices come through 3.4, 3.5. So 3.7, Aaron, that's pretty good. 3.6, Albert. I'll pick the low number. I'll shoot for 3.5 here, actually. And my hope is that we get like we had. Headwinds from gas prices raising prices. I think we'll get tailwinds from lower gas prices this time around. That'll help us. But in the long run, so I'll shoot 3.7 is Aaron, 3.5 I'll shoot. Albert will be in the middle, 3.6. And then tomorrow it'll be like 4.5. We'll see. I don't know. That's going to be interesting. I always want to do it after the inflation reports, but you know, I think it'll be still above 3, but I'm gonna go for 3.5. I'm hoping for even lower, but 3.5 I think is where we'll get it. As always, I like to remind you of certain things in each particular situation. One of my favorites is, remember, like if we compare the Boise metropolitan statistical area, your favorite work from the favorite place for Californians to move to and work from home has about 765,000 people. They're permitting more housing than the San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley metropolitan statistical area. And I'm just talking about San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley. I'm not talking about the 9-county area. I'm talking about just, yes, you know, Alameda and in Peninsula. But 4.6 million people, you know, literally 6 times more people, and they have the same number of building permits as Boise. That's disheartening and concerning. So go out and take out a building permit if you live in the Bay Area, and that's your homework. Colin says, do we expect economic changes as a result of what's happening in Israel-Palestine? So that's really interesting. It depends to what extent this becomes a wider and wider global geopolitical phenomenon or war. In the sense that it's concentrated and heavy, and this is a really challenging topic in particular, and one that is particularly divisive in particular, though any war itself is tragedy, and this is no different. And so looking at the ongoing series of conflicts everywhere, be it from Ukraine and Russia and Israel and Palestine, none of this is ultimately good for markets as they add uncertainty to markets, and none of them are ultimately good for people who often bear the brunt of the human cost of battles. And so in any sense, this extended period, although even if we look at economic conditions, it depends. If you're a defense contractor that does business with certain regions of the world, then sure, it's going to be a good year for you. But if you look at the other situations and the other downside risks, displacements, refugees, displacements, other things all create economic costs. And potentially one of the challenges that we have in particular is developing and turning those costs into something that can be remedied or mitigated in a meaningful way through ways that we can engage and, you know, look to build economic outcomes. No good answers there, actually. No good answers there. Nobody talks about PPP firepower that is the U.S. economy across many goods industries. Also regional PPP. That's true. That's true. Our purchasing power parity firepower is substantial, and that's hugely beneficial. How about the possible government shutdown? That is perhaps one of the realest cases of economic costs. We go back to previous government shutdowns, and that drops GDP 0.5%, Albert. So likely it will hit the GDP, and it could hit us in a bad way the longer it goes on for, particularly as both parties seem to be rather non-committal about a number of things. You might be going over the river through the woods to grandma's via unpaid TSE security checkpoints next week. Oh, boy. I know that TSA workers in particular are considered on-the-job workers in challenging scenarios, but let's say you're working at Livermore and you're a government contractor and you're furloughed for a long period of time. You've got a situation where suddenly now you are in a position where you're withholding spending, and although you might be able to maintain that, it hurts all the other businesses that you spend money on. And even though you get that money paid back, it doesn't flow through the economy the same way you might have paid for it in the first place. And so there's a lot of people that lose out when it comes to things like government shutdowns, not least the millions of furloughed workers not having the ability to keep up with their checks and pay their rent. Aaron says Northwest is on fire. They're building 10X versus California like crazy between Central Oregon, Washington, Northern Nevada, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Northern Colorado. Bam, bam, bam. If they can do it there, I'm telling you, I want a 10-story. I want more high-rise options available. It's very interesting though. You can always visit a city that has, you know, it's different viewpoints, different strokes for different folks, and I understand that. And I'm not advocating anything in particular, but I am advocating building and increasing the housing supply is an effective measure at controlling costs. And if we look at big questions, even if you have highly dense cities in other places or highly dense regions, building up can be a solution to getting things done. And particular, if you look at ways that you can create equity and people can generate equity as in a flat they might own or something else in a high rise, you create a potential for economic security and multi-generational economic security that passes through this. And so I'm a big fan of just doing some more things. I know it's so hard. And I was reading about this, and, Albert, Sean was sending me some stuff on this too. And it's a fascinating ongoing issue. So let's turn it back to the Bay Area specifically here. And we've got some other things. And I want to answer some other questions that we had on the board that I didn't touch. So labor force data. So right now, looking at San Francisco, Oakland, Hayward, we actually reviewed this data a bit. This is the same September data we had. We don't have October data yet for the metropolitan areas, but to give you a sense of this, and I'll blow up San Francisco a little bit. And then we have San Jose over here on the right. But we look at this, and the Bay Area in particular, we saw bad news bears across all sectors, information sector, all around the table. And most interestingly, we saw people leaving the labor force. So even though the unemployment rate went down, we had a drop in the labor force, which was bad. And some of this stuff, if we look at non-farm related labor in particular, that dropped about 13,000 in the August to September period. So the unemployment rate is not an effective indicator of strength. It's showing in its own way a very mixed report, if not a weakening report, despite the improvement in unemployment. And across the board, you're seeing, even for San Jose, Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, same sort of situation. You're looking at declines, couple thousand lost here, a couple thousand information sector, 5,000 jobs lost in professional business services. It's a particularly challenging market in the Bay Area right now, even though unemployment remains very low relative even to the rest of the country. And you're seeing a lot of these things. Bay Area lost 17,000 jobs last month, Albert points out. Google, Cisco, Splunk, Snap, Meta, all those layoffs, all those are really having a picture on this. And so I think we're going to see more of these numbers hit through October and into November. And it's just going to be kind of a downward trend, although not catastrophic. It is going to force many people into circumstances where they will have to change jobs. Now, to answer some of those questions, so we talked about hiring, we talked about January, we talked about indicators, we talked about tech industry, we talked about Black Swan, we talked about, there's a few other things here. I'll give us some hope. Here's the hope. Here's the hope, and here's the hope. Let's do some hope right now. Investment, economic investment, aggregate private investments growing again. Yay! If this continues, that means we're investing in our economic capacity for the future. And that's good. Which means that somewhere in the country, there'll be a job for you. Wherever that might be. It'll be great. It'll be a very nice job. You'll work for Albert at Albert's List at the new corporate headquarters, not in downtown San Francisco. Intel's building factories you can work in. If Ohio site's nice to you, you're right. Intel's building places around the country. This onshoring factor is continuing. Supply chains are continuing. A story of hope for U.S. workers, although it's bad for GDP in aggregate. And there's The Economist had a nice display about this. And this is the hard part between when you talk to economists and normal human beings. People here, politically speaking, it conveys a very strong message. Let's build factories at home and let's build up industrial capacity here. But usually it's more costly to do so. Labor is more costly. Inputs might be more costly. And so products end up being more costly. The end story is you end up doing less, selling less, investing less. Your GDP kind of doesn't reach its full potential. And so, we're seeing this globally, though. There's a trend towards nativism across the world. And I think you'll see more trade barriers, and of that, you'll see more opportunities locally to build companies. But at the same time, you'll see aggregate GDP growth drop because we won't recognize those long-term advantages with trade. On the other side, of course, it's complex. We know that free trade's a nice thing theoretically, but it affects workers differently depending on where you are and where you are within the own spectrum of this. So it's not a full answer, and it's not an optimization problem where maximizing GDP is the end all. And so fully understanding all of those things. California does need to truly change policies to become far more competitive. Texas, Georgia, Arizona, Ohio. California's got so much to love about it and so many things to drive people there. And it's heartbreaking every time somebody has to say, I can't do it. I just can't make sense of it. I can't make the economics work, and I can't make the red tape work. And they don't do something. They don't build something. They don't create something, and something goes out of state. And so it's an important thing for you to keep an eye on, even from a state to state basis. One question. So what to keep in mind when it comes to investing in bonds for the next 10 to 30 years? Can't give you any specific financial advice, but things you look at when you look at bonds in the next 10 to 30 years, you have to look at and be conscious of yield. You have to be conscious of duration. You have to be conscious of risk. When investing over the long term, locking in higher yields and higher rates are nice to do when you can do so. And that will help you. Remember, there are two things that affect bonds that you make money from bonds: price changes in bonds and and coupon payments that pay your regular stream of income. Decide which type of investor you are. Are you going to be buying this for the coupon payments and then hoping for a price increase or decrease? Then you have a certain decision to make relative to buying a bond and keeping it for the coupon payments versus buying a bond and speculating on the price changes so you can sell it at a profit later down the line. Corporate bonds are an interesting mix of things. Municipal bonds are an interesting tax mix of things. Keep these things in mind as you go forward, and just imagine to be careful and vigilant about assessing risk accurately and adequately. And don't invest in a 30-year bond if you don't really think that thing will be around in 30 years that you're investing in. So that goes to anything. So I'm keen on I'm focusing less on the speculation side of it. Let's see. Today, is now a time to move residences for work? What a great question. Is now a time to move residences for work? Hard time is when you move residences, it's a terrible time. It is actually the worst time if you're a first-time home buyer. It is a horrible time to be it is a historically bad time to be a first-time home buyer. If you are, by moving residences, if you're talking rentals, that depends where. It is nice to think about on some level, but then you also, this other tendency that we have, the question of remote work, a lot has been overblown, I think, perhaps about employers coming out and saying you can't work from home. I think hybrid work schedules are becoming more common, and with that hybridization is the desire to be present. And so I'd be conscious and thoughtful within the industry that you work in, where you think those standards lie and how much you can maintain those standards. I have a friend who's an electrical engineer, got rid of his office altogether, still lives in a very expensive place, but got rid of his office, doesn't need to come back to that office. There's no need to have the office, never comes into work, and is able to maintain. And a lot of people in IT, a lot of programmers, he's an electrical engineer, a lot of people in engineering have jobs that allow them to do that. In that case, I don't think anything's coming for you anytime soon. But I think it is something to be careful about and particularly cautious about, depending on your level of ambition and how you seek to advance within your organization in the next 5 years. And that being said, gung ho, and there's a generational difference between younger folks and older folks with regards to the perception that you have to be in the office versus not be in the office. And that's becoming very evident. During the 2008 recession, we talked about that. What industries most impacted and least impacted by a recession? So most impacted, forward-looking things. If we have a recession, industries that do badly in a recession are things like tech. There's things like consumer discretionary, people spending on stuff that they don't necessarily need. Industries that do well in a recession are things like the government and utilities. Those often become things that do well, not only from a stock perspective, but also from the perspective of the way that they hire and maintain workforces, because they're considered reliable, steady jobs as opposed to riskier ones. And so that depends. And you see that axis fluctuate back and forth depending on what cycle we're in. Healthcare, my goodness, healthcare is robust and it will continue to be robust even in bad economic times. Healthcare is more nuanced, though. So yes, for essential healthcare services, less so for things like elective health services, like dentists. In recessions, people spend a lot less money on elective care. They won't opt for that dentistry appointment or that plastic surgery that they wanted, but they will go through and engage in the critical healthcare pieces that they'll always need. Collins says, so with these trends in mind, median wages are below trend, Americans expanding credit and debt, lowered consumer confidence, falling inflation. Where are we heading? We're gliding downward. We've got this magical hovercraft, and it's gliding us downward economically speaking, and we're hoping to land in this magnificent pool of pillows. But if we overshoot it, we're over the cliff. We've jumped over. We're over Point Reyes, and we're on the other side of that thing. And suddenly, we're in the abyss of economic despair. So our hope is that we have a soft landing. We land in the pillows, bounce up, and start upwardly sloping again. Right now, we are headed downward, though, and our hope is that the downward trajectory will be light, even, and maintainable, and keep us above zero. The downward trajectory is that it might not be. Any geopolitical event, global or economic crisis or financial crisis could easily offset this. We have a lot of things that could fit that bill. If one of those things breaks, we could end up in a recession, and that would be bad news bears. But we're not. I'm still contending downward slope right now, hoping for an upward slope at some point in the next 2 years. Albert says funeral services. People are always dying, say Albert. That's a good question. People are always dying. But do you want to opt for the nature of those expenses that people spend? I don't think funeral directors are always immune from certain expenses. Obviously, in good economic times, you might splurge for that nicer tombstone. If you're in bad economic times, you might opt for, hey, can we get? I've got some Tupperware. Can we bury that in the backyard? Drinking establishments. People drink when they're happy, sad, or in between. Albert's got the ideas. Aaron says state investment from FDI, PE, VE. Ooh, good link to BEA and some investment council stuff. Very good stuff. I love it. How's California doing on this, Aaron? Doing better than New Mexico. All right. What else do we got? Any other questions? Leaving it up to the audience. How are you guys doing today? Is anyone still online? Did anyone make it through? Let me see. I'll stop sharing. Stopping sharing is stopping caring. Oh, we have some survivors. Thank you for all of those who have maintained it. I'm so grateful that you've been able to hang on through this. Anyone have any questions about anything before we... What else do you guys got?
I don't know. I guess as we look into the rest of the year, the remaining, what do we got? 17 days plus the remaining 48 days of 2023.
Wow.
What do you think we'll see? What are the biggest surprises? And I guess if you're job seeking, what are your hopes for the next 48 days?
Well, what are my hopes? I like it. So, well.
What are the rational things you can say? Let's not get so emotional.
My hopes is we make it through I hopes is we make it through the next 48 days. Whatever it is, 17, 31, yeah, 48 days. So in short, there's a few things that you should watch out, and you'll get a hang of this maybe in December when we talk about the November jobs report. I'm interested in pre-holiday hiring as it pertains to service sector. I'm interested in anticipated holiday spending. Take a look around at what people are buying in the next couple of months. If people are flying off the shelves, things are in demand, that bodes well for consumer confidence starting the next year, and it makes me more optimistic about where we're going to go. If you're going into the stores, noticing times that were previously busy, going to malls, other places while you're shopping for the holidays, and notice that it doesn't seem to be activity level that you've seen, that would be really fascinating. And that's really, really fascinating to see. So on the other side of it, keep an eye on this. I'm interested in the next jobs report. I'm interested in we can kick hiring up a little bit before the holidays. If you're looking to change jobs and look at jobs, it's still very much, it is not yet in all sectors a employer's market. Employees still have ways to look for and find jobs that are optimal to you. Keep an eye on the things that matter most to you, be it work from home, benefits that you find most appealing. And back to the question of upskilling, and a thing that I'm very keen about that you guys think about as you go forward. If you feel uncertain or not confident about your ability on the job market, take the time while you've got the time. If you've got the job already and you're thinking of moving somewhere, think about skilling. What all those upskilled techniques, ideas, concepts, subject matters, not merely just getting a degree, but learning and applying skills that can meaningfully boost your potential in the next 3 to 6 months. That will well position you in the future. Stay ahead of the game. Yes, that's right. Oh my goodness, good questions. Aaron says California has more trapped capital versus New Mexico. Yeah, they have to put capital in New Mexico to trap it. We're still waiting for it. We've got a trap out there. I've got it in my backyard. I'm just waiting for capital. Candida, no questions for me. I'm just grateful. Thank you so much, Candida. It's so honored to have you here. I'm so grateful that you're here. Question to hear these analyses beyond investor advantage and focusing on workers' practical interests. Absolutely. It's like, I want this to be more of an every person's economic perspective, and that's so important. Not just like, what are the profits? I
like to call it
well, if we get rid of the workers, we can boost profitability 30%. And apply you in an MBA program. We do need applications. So, Scott, nature retail stores and their shelves has changed with longer periods of black sales events to avoid crowds during Thanksgiving holidays and more intelligence-driven shelf stocking. That's true, Scott. It's not what it used to be, and that's an important observation to make. Use code Riley White for free tuition. Now you get a 1% discount on the first $1 million you spend with us. But one of those things never spend this. I'll just print you all out degrees. We'll call it a degree. What do you guys want? Got a few degrees. We got some here. What do you want?
I'll take an MBA with a concentration in quantitative finance. Thank you.
There we go. Done and done. Here you go, sir. Done. Check. It's a prestigious, non-accredited university called.
We'll print out degrees like the Fed prints money.
That's right. It'll be. You get a degree. Everyone gets one. But Scott's right about this. We can't, we can't view this necessarily. I am aggregate spending numbers, the nature of spending, and how we can observe that. Look particularly at end of year sales numbers for publicly traded companies from Amazon on down to your favorite retailers. And especially in February when those earnings come out, that's going to be really interesting to see.
What did you think of the Q3 earnings?
What'd you say, Albert? I'm sorry. I was talking.
What did you think of the Q3 earnings that have been coming out so far?
That's it. Okay, mixed bag in a lot of places and very interesting. So on one level, I'm not surprised that some things have ended up where they were. Some things have done well, some things have not done well, and I'm thinking about oh man, God, things that stuck out to you. What was something that stuck out to you on a local firm that was interesting? So Amazon's increase in net sales was, I thought, very interesting. It was like a 13% increase.
I think Tesla was interesting this last quarter.
Oh yeah, Tesla was also really interesting.
Yeah.
And then you've got weird companies out there that have been out there just doing things like Fisker, and you've got all these other things that are just it's a mixed bag for some companies. So you've got a few big movers that have been compiling and developing solid growth strategies, and then a whole mixed bag.
You're seeing Meta and Google and these companies that had laid off a ton of people earlier this year.
Oh yeah,
mark of profitability.
True.
So there's talk that they might hire again, but who knows?
Gosh, you're right. But we're looking at other things too. You're absolutely right. And then you've got the San Diego company, Telesis, whatever. That a $10 million loss. You've got asset managers coming out with sizable losses, which is fascinating to see that investors are doing well. A whole bunch of asset managers doing poorly in that sense. And also you've got, it's very interesting. I'm interested. It's everyone made incorrect decisions for different reasons. It's it's Tolstoy-esque in the sense that a happy economy, a happy company, happy companies are always the same. Unhappy companies are different for different reasons. It's this sort of Tolstoy-esque perspective on how these things work. But a lot of this will be interesting. And if this persists, what we haven't seen though are widespread layoffs or other things. But as companies get craftier in the next 6 months, it'll be interesting to see.
Well, the next thing coming up that's big is that Broadcom will be or rather VMware will be merging into Broadcom. So that's going to lead to a lot of mass layoffs because of redundancies. So that should be an interesting blip to see on the radar.
And actually, what's coming out this week? Target's coming out this week, right?
Target is a bellwether for the economy, so that'll be a big one.
That'll be an interesting one. I'm interested because of they complain about the shrink and the thefts and other things, and it's going to be interesting to see if they can hit. And when we think about this, by the way, those in the audience, when we look at things like earnings or these things or what this all means, so companies, if a company is big enough or publicly traded, they're covered by analysts. Analysts have a job where they follow the company. That's their job. They attend the earnings calls and through a series of other things that are kind of shifty. The company brings them out to their company to view the operations, and they put them up in a nice hotel. They have all these other things to them, and analysts create a consensus estimate on their earnings. And so analysts get together, and some of them, and we have a lot of evidence in the literature that analysts look at what other analysts think is going to happen. And so they hurt. And so a lot of people say, this is the consensus for an estimate. And so when you see things like earnings come out, it means that, okay, the analysts, the people who are hypothetically the smartest people in the room with regards to following how a company works and operates outside of the company itself, providing investors with an estimate of what they think is going to happen. This consensus creates the basis for whether a company's earnings is good or bad. And so when they say the consensus is $25 million of revenues, or $25 billion of revenues if you're Target, and it's 27 billion, it's like Target did a great job and the stock price goes up. And then if it was only 20 billion, it's like, ooh, Target did terribly, boo, Target. And so it's based on this collective best guess that's combined from a relatively small end value of people making a prediction. So it's interesting, really interesting stuff. Anyway, sorry, that's more
All
of a
good, all good. No,
FYI,
we thank you for coming back, and we're gonna have you back again in December, hopefully to recap how all your predictions and how 2023 really went. And so also to probably look ahead to 2024 in January and just predict the year and see where that all goes. So if nobody has any other questions, thank you all for coming. We're gonna go ahead and post this on YouTube probably tonight and send out an email. And we wish you everything in the best as we head here into the holidays and final season for Dr. White and his students. And we'll see you all soon again as we talk about the state of the economy, your jobs, inflation, and how it all ties together. So I'll see you soon. Happy early Thanksgiving, and thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Have a great week.
Gobble, gobble.
Gobble, gobble. Thank you all so much for attending. Thank
Yeah.
you, Nancy, for coming. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you.
See you all.
See you guys later. Bye-bye.